Picture this. It's 1932 and German scientists have just invented something called Enigma, a machine that can create up to 150 billion unique codes every single day. For all practical purposes, it's unbreakable. Governments and military organizations across the world panic. This is an encryption technology that will allow them to communicate secretly. And if anyone were to decipher these messages, they would know exactly what everyone was doing, where they were going, who they were meeting, and so much more. But there was one man named Alan Turing, a mathematician who specialized in breaking codes. He had a unique understanding of how the human mind worked, which led him to develop techniques that allowed him to crack some of the most complex ciphers in history. But when he first saw Enigma, he didn't flinch. He didn't tell anyone that it was impossible. Instead, he quietly got to work. Soon enough, he had a plan, and it was crazy. It involved building a new machine, a machine that would allow them to decode Enigma in no time at all. But it wouldn't be easy. This machine would need to be able to make 6,000 calculations per second, something that humans simply couldn't do. So he began designing a machine that could, a machine that would become the first ever general-purpose computer. Now before we jump in, let's rewind a bit. Let's go back to the beginning when the story of the real-life Indiana Jones started. Alan Turing was born in London, England in 1912. He was a prodigy from an early age. When he was just 14 years old, he wrote a paper about mathematical proof. But unlike many people, especially those in the 1900s, Alan wasn't really interested in money, fame, or power. All he cared about was learning and pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. In fact, one of his biographers described him as being motivated entirely by intellectual curiosity. When World War II broke out, Turing enlisted in the army. He wanted to help defend Britain against the Nazis. However, soon after joining, it became clear that Alan's talents weren't needed on the battlefield. Instead, he was recruited by a top-secret government organization called the Government Code and Cipher School. Here he was given the task of cracking some of the most secure codes in history. And if you think that sounds like a made-up movie plot, well, it isn't. It actually happened. At Bletchley Park, Turing and his team worked tirelessly to break the Enigma code. But it wasn't easy. The Germans changed the code every day, which meant that Turing had to come up with a new way to crack it every single time. But eventually he did it, and it was the beginning of something big. Now at this point, you might be wondering why we even care about this code anyway, right? What was so important about it? Well, as it turns out, quite a lot. You see, the Germans used the Enigma machine to send secret messages to each other during World War II. They thought that their messages were safe, but they were wrong. By breaking the Enigma code, Turing and his team were able to read everything they were saying. This gave the British a huge advantage in the war. It allowed them to know where the Germans were planning to strike next, what their defenses were, and even what their leaders were thinking. And as a result, it's estimated that the war would have lasted at least 2 more years without Turing's help. That means that millions of lives would have been lost needlessly. So how did he do it? Well, the answer is simple. He built the bomb machine. Now if you think that sounds like a joke, well, it isn't. That's really what happened. Turing designed a machine that was capable of testing thousands of different codes every second. And that's when things got really interesting. As it turned out, the bomb machine was able to crack the Enigma code within hours. The British were now able to read everything the Germans were saying, and as a result, they won the war. Now I know what you're probably thinking. If the British won the war because of this machine, then why aren't we using it today? Well, that's a great question, but it's a little bit complicated. You see, the bomb machine was destroyed at the end of the war. That's because the British didn't want anyone else to get their hands on it. They were afraid that the Germans would use it against them. So instead, they blew it up. But luckily, Turing had already made plans for a new machine. It was bigger, faster, and more powerful than the bomb. It was the first ever general-purpose computer. And now that you know how important this machine was, you can start to understand why we're making this video. We think that everyone should know about it. not just historians. After all, this machine changed the course of human history. It led to the creation of the internet, smartphones, cars, and planes. Without it, we wouldn't have any of these things today. And yet nobody knows about it. Well, until now. You see, despite the fact that Turing was responsible for creating one of the most important inventions in history, he never received any recognition for it. In fact, he was fired from his job at Bletchley Park in 1954 for being gay. But that's not the worst part. He was also prosecuted under a law that criminalized homosexuality. And as if it wasn't bad enough, he was forced to undergo chemical castration. Turing died in 1954 at the age of 41. He took his own life after being convicted for being gay. But now we're going to tell you something that will make you smile. The German Enigma machine was never broken, despite the fact that it was able to generate up to 150 billion unique combinations every day. It was never broken. That is because the Germans stopped using it in 1945. They realized that the British were reading their messages and they didn't want to risk it anymore. You see, the reason that Turing was able to crack the Enigma code was because he understood how the human mind worked. He knew that the Germans would never use a random combination of letters because it would be too easy to break. Instead, they would always use meaningful combinations. For example, if the Germans were planning to attack a city, they would encrypt the name of the city along with the date and time of the attack. This made it much easier for Turing to break the code because he knew that the Germans weren't going to use random combinations. However, this also made it harder for Turing to build his machine. He couldn't just build a machine that tested random combinations. He needed to build a machine that could test meaningful combinations. And that's what made the bomb machine so special. It was the first ever computer that could do this. In fact, the bomb machine was so advanced that it was able to do much more than crack the Enigma code. It was the first ever computer that could play chess. It was also the first ever computer that could be programmed to do multiple tasks. That's why it's considered to be the first ever general purpose computer. However, despite its many accomplishments, the bomb machine was never finished. That's because the war ended before it could be completed. But luckily, Turing had already made plans for a new machine. It was bigger, faster, and more powerful than the bomb. In fact, it was the first ever computer that could do anything. It was called the Analytical Engine, and it was designed by Charles Babbage in 1837. However, Babbage never finished it. He died in 1871 before he could complete it. But luckily, Turing was able to finish it. You see, Turing had been working on the Analytical Engine for years before he was recruited to Bletchley Park. When he was asked to stop working on it and start breaking codes instead, he didn't argue. He knew that it was more important to help win the war than to finish his project. But once the war was over, he went back to work on the Analytical Engine. He completed it, and then he realized that it could be used for much more than just playing chess. It could be used for anything. That's why it's considered to be the first ever general purpose computer. And now that you know how important this machine was, you can start to understand why we're making this video. We think that everyone should know about it, not just historians. After all, this machine changed the course of human history. It led to the creation of the internet, smartphones, cars, and planes. Without it, we wouldn't have any of these things today. But Turing was never given credit for his invention. He was fired from his job at Bletchley Park in 1954 for being gay. And as if it wasn't bad enough, he was prosecuted under a law that criminalized homosexuality. The worst part is that he was forced to undergo chemical castration. Turing died in 1954 at the age of 41. He took his own life after being convicted for being gay. However, in 2013, Prime Minister David Cameron apologized to Turing's family and granted him a royal pardon. That's why we're making this video. We want to make sure that everyone knows about Alan Turing and the bomb machine. We think that he deserves our respect and admiration. Now here's your engagement hook. Can you imagine a world without computers or the internet? Without Turing? That might have been our reality. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed this story and want to learn more about the untold stories that shaped our world, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.